News just coming in. The Nobel Prize ceremony is happening in Sweden. Let's cut live across to that ceremony in Sweden.
In York, where he also remains on the faculty. I will now describe the discoveries behind this year's award. So this year's prize concerns the circadian rhythm. The word circadian originates from the Latin word circa, meaning around, and dies, meaning day. But in a way, it is actually about astronomy. Ever since the emergence of life on Earth, about 4 billion years ago, evolving life forms had to adapt to the rotation of our planet. This ability to prepare for the regular daily fluctuations is crucial for all life forms. But how is this possible? This year's Nobel laureates have been studying this fundamental problem and solved the mystery of how an inner clock in most of our cells in our bodies can anticipate daily fluctuations between night and day to optimize our behavior and physiology. This existence of an inner clock was first described already in the 18th century. The French astronomer de Meuron studied the mimosa plant that opens its leaves towards the sun during day but closes at dusk. De Meuron asked what would happen if the plant was exposed to constant darkness. And he found that even then, for several days, the leaves continued to follow their regular 24-hour daily rhythm. In the 20th century, it was established that also other plants and animals, including rodents and humans, have their own biological clocks following the daily circadian rhythm. Studies of the clock in fruit flies show that many different behaviors are controlled by the clock. Fruit flies are really excellent model organisms for studies of genetics, and in the 1970s, a mutation that affected the fly's daily rhythm was identified. The mutated locus was called period. But how did the mutation affect the internal clock? This year's laureates, they wish to peek inside the clock and figure out how it actually works. A first breakthrough came in 1984 when Jeff Hall, in collaboration with Michael Rosbash and Michael Young working independently, were able to isolate the period gene. Now the scientists could begin to disentangle the cellular wheels and cogs of a clock machinery. Jeff Hall and Michael Rosbash showed that the period protein itself was cycling and peaked during night and was low during day. In 1990, they showed that the period mRNA also oscillated, as shown on this slide, and accumulated several hours before the period protein. These and other important observations led to a brilliant idea for how the clock works by a feedback control mechanism. The idea was shown to be correct, and in the next few slides, I will show how it actually works. When the period gene is active, period mRNA is made. The period mRNA is transported to the cell's cytoplasm, where period protein is made. When period protein accumulates, the protein moves into the cell's nucleus, where it blocks the activity of its own gene. When the gene is blocked, no more RNA can be made. Period protein levels will decrease, and the gene will no longer be blocked. And the production of mRNA can start all over again, and the cycle can continue. But it remained unclear how the period protein could accumulate in the nucleus to inhibit the gene. This problem was solved when Michael Young discovered a second gene called timeless that is also critical for the clock. This is shown in this experiment. The top diagram shows how period mRNA is cycling over several days in normal flies. The bottom diagram shows that the cycling was disrupted when the timeless gene had been inactivated. But how did the timeless protein affect the period gene? Additional experiments show that timeless protein bound to the period protein, and together they entered the cell nucleus where they could inhibit the period gene. It was also critical to understand how the speed of the oscillations can be controlled. Michael Young identified yet another protein called double time, or DBT. This protein was shown to slow down the accumulation of the period protein, which explained how the oscillation can be adjusted to more closely match a 24-hour cycle. Jeff Hall and Michael Rosbach showed that two additional proteins, clock and cycle, activated the period gene in fruit flies. So, with all these groundbreaking discoveries by the three laureates, an elegant feedback control mechanism for the biological clock had finally been unraveled. We now recognize that biological clocks function by these same principles in other animals, including in ourselves, in humans. Most of our cells in our bodies have these clocks. Our inner clock adapts our physiology to the dramatically different phases of the day and regulates many critical functions such as behavior, hormone levels, sleep, body temperature, and metabolism. We do not feel well when there is a temporary mismatch between our external environment and the internal biological clock, for example, when we experience jet lag. Studies have also indicated that chronic misalignment between our lifestyles and the clock is associated with increased risk for various diseases. Since the paradigm-shifting discoveries by Hall, Rosbach, and Young, circadian biology has developed into a highly dynamic research field with vast implications for our health and well-being. Here they are again, Jeffrey Hall, Michael Rosbach, and Michael Young. This is the end of the presentation, and I would now wish to present our expert panel, who would be happy to respond if there are questions. So, at the far end, we have Professor Julien Sirat, who is a member of the Nobel Committee. In center, we have Anna Wedell, who is the chair of the Nobel Committee. And on her side, we have Professor Carlos Ibanez, who is also a member of the Nobel Committee. So please, if there are any questions, please go ahead. There must be at least one question. Okay, please go ahead.
Have you already been in contact with the professors with the director?
We are usually not afraid of calling them about this. And I was able to get hold of Michael Rosbach and Jeffrey Hall, but I haven't reached Michael Young. So they just got the news. I first got hold of Michael Rosbach, and he was silent, and then he said, "You are kidding me." Is there any other question?
Yeah, I'm curious.
Please go ahead.
About the dynamics of this system. So if one were to change the cycle to like 6 hours.
All right, so you were listening to the announcement from Stockholm in Sweden of the Nobel Prize for Medicine for the year 2017, and the prize has jointly been announced and awarded to three scientists, Jeffrey C. Hall, Michael Rosbach, and Michael W. Young, all three from the United States, for their discoveries of molecular mechanisms and controlling the circadian rhythm. This is news just coming in from Stockholm in Sweden, where the Nobel Prize for Medicine has just been announced.